February 641 AD. Emperor Heraclius was dead, and the Roman state faced a massive threat. The Arabs and their new Islamic faith had taken the Fertile Crescent by storm, defeating Roman and Persian field armies in their respective provinces of Syria and Mesopotamia. While the imperial government struggled to contain the advance of the Muslims, unstable finances and religious strife brought further destabilization. In a context where political unity was crucial, the government split between two factions. There was senior emperor Constantin III and his co-emperor Heraclius with his mother Martina. Mistrust was rampant, and in May, the sickly Constantine passed away at 29. Thus, the teenage Heraclius became sole emperor. However, Martina's unpopularity and rumors of her poisoning of Constantine drove discontent. General Valentinus pushed for the promotion of the latter's son, Constans. Patriarch Pyrrhus, a prominent supporter of Martina, was expelled to Africa. Soon after, she and her son were mutilated and exiled to the island of Rhodes. Around the 11-year-old Constans formed a regency council. Valentinus married his daughter Fausta to the young emperor and took charge of the army in the east. This single year of political strife had distracted the state from the real issue, Egypt. Pushed out by the Arabs, the remaining Roman troops evacuated Alexandria. For their part, the Sasanians fared even worse. Their decisive defeat at Nahavand forced Yazdegerd III to flee further east inside his own crumbling empire. Since the initial Lombard invasion, Roman authorities in Italy looked to protect the remaining imperial territories. However, Exarch Isaac failed to prevent the fall of Liguria to King Rothari. Now the new frontier with the Caliphate, Armenia became the theater of frequent military actions. There, local commander Theodore Rushtuni campaigned with partial success. While he could not prevent the sack of Tvin, he fared better the next year by repelling another Arab attack. A different battle resulted in the defeat of Roman general Procopius. Still, the imperial regime recognized Rushtuni's direct authority over Armenia. In a subsequent military campaign, Valentinus's army was put to flight. Despite this, the man returned to the capital and attempted to usurp the imperial title. His plan backfired. Facing riots he could not control, he was lynched. The Roman navy remained the dominant force in the Mediterranean Sea, a great asset to attack and protect coastal cities. In 645, it was decided to use this navy for a major operation. An expeditionary force sailed south under the command of General Manuel. Its goal: to reconquer Egypt. With local support, Alexandria was reoccupied. The army then proceeded to march down the Nile Delta. A decisive contest took place when Manuel faced Amr ibn Alas. The Romans were bested and repelled from Egypt for good. This failure, but also the precedent of Heraclius' rebellion 4 decades ago, convinced the Exarch of Africa, Gregory, that he could take his chance to usurp power. He exploited the religious debates over the imperial doctrine of monothelitism to gather support from the hardline Chalcedonians. One of them, Maximus the Confessor, a fierce opponent of monothelitism, traveled to Rome and rallied Pope Theodore to his side. The next year, the Muslims under Abdallah ibn Sa'd attacked the Exarchate. Gregory met the enemy at Sofetula, where he was decisively defeated. Still, the Romans remained safe inside their fortified cities, so the enemy proceeded to pillage the region. In the east, the governor of Syria, Muawiyah, ramped up the pressure on Anatolia. Cappadocia took much of the damage, and the Arabs returned to Damascus with a massive plunder. With the death of Gregory and the ascension of Gennadius, Africa rolled back under central imperial control. The new exarch paid a massive tribute for the Arabs to leave his territory. In response to the Chalcedonian backlash, Constans II promulgated the typos. The formula of the ecthesis was removed from the narthex of the Hagia Sophia, but monotheletism was not officially revoked. Instead, in an attempt to tame the religious controversy, debates over the natures of Christ was simply made illegal. In the same effort, the government attempted to enforce mainstream Christianity to the Armenian Church. In turn, the Armenians convened a synod, after which they officially declared their refusal. Knowing this will provoke imperial retaliation, Theodore Rushtuni pledged allegiance to the caliphate. In the West, doctrinal opposition against the government grew even further under the influence of Maximus. Pope Theodore died in 649, precipitating the election of a successor, Martin I. This choice was made without imperial approval. In the same year, another council was convened in the Lateran Palace of Rome. There, 105 mostly Western bishops united to debate over imperial policies. Their final answer was clear. They condemned both the ecthesis of Heraclius and the typos of Constans, and excommunicated the supporters of these doctrines. In response, the emperor ordered Exarch Olympius to arrest the pope. However, because of inability or disloyalty, he did not carry out the order. With the imperials far too busy with the Muslim threat in Anatolia, an effective schism divided East and West. By now equipped with a sizable war fleet, the Arabs took to the seas. One of the first victims, the island of Cyprus, was assaulted and plundered. On land, another major invasion devastated Isauria. A truce was eventually agreed between Constans and Muawiyah, providing some respite on the front. Despite this, Sicily would also be raided. Far in the east, Yazdegerd was murdered, and the once great Sasanian Empire ceased to exist. The rebellious exarch Olympius died on his way to Sicily. Thus, his successor, Theodore Calliopas, eventually marched on Rome and, without much opposition, arrested Martin and Maximus. The prisoners were transferred to Constantinople. Constans well understood the strategic importance of Armenia for the empire. Rushtuni's wavering loyalty had reportedly already led to the defeat of an imperial army on the Euphrates. Looking to reaffirm Roman authority in the Caucasus, Constans arrived in person with a large force. Rapidly, he re-established political control of Armenia, with many of its nobles retaining loyalty to Constantinople. Rushtuni fled to Damascus, and General Marianus was left in charge of imperial interests in the region. The emperor returned to Constantinople to deal with scheming politicians. Following a large military build-up, the Arabs went on the offensive again. Their fleet advanced along the coast, pillaging Rhodes and Crete. Meanwhile, the land forces under Muawiyah established a base in Cappadocia and pierced through Anatolia, reaching the Asian side of the Bosphorus Strait. In the capital, Constans elevated his son Constantine as co-emperor. At about the same time, the trial of Pope Martin declared him guilty of treason. While Martin recognized the election of his successor Eugene, he was forced into exile in Chersonesus, where he would pass away soon after. In the wake of the emperor's departure, fighting had resumed in Armenia. The Roman forces were driven out, and control of the region was lost again. In fact, the attacks at sea were more of a pressing matter, and Constans took personal command of the navy. A decisive battle occurred off the coast of Lycia, with heavy casualties on both sides. In the end, the Roman fleet was crushingly defeated. Constans reportedly switched his imperial regalia for the clothes of one of his men to escape the disaster. It seems that the Arab fleet then advanced on Constantinople, but a storm compelled it to retreat. The internal tensions in the caliphate may also have played a part. With no naval support, the land forces withdrew as well, and imperial forces reasserted control over Anatolia. It would not be long before the assassination of Caliph Uthman triggered a Muslim civil war, the first fitna. Constans took advantage of this instability to return Armenia under imperial allegiance. He would be active in the Caucasus for some time, carefully building alliances with local lords. Constans also became the first emperor since Maurice to actively campaign in the Balkans. He attacked the Slavs and resettled the prisoners in Anatolia. Mired in his civil war, Muawiyah sought a truce with the empire. Each day, the Arabs would send 1,000 numismata, 1 horse and 1 slave to honor this agreement. In the same year, the 2 younger sons of Constans, Heraclius and Tiberius, were proclaimed co-emperors. This period of respite allowed the army to reorganize and begin reforms which would, in time, lead to the formation of the thematic system. For now, the remains of the old field armies of the empire took headquarters in each corner of Anatolia. These military districts were named after the associated armies. Although the chronology of the development of the themes is unclear, the early districts were the following: the Armeniacon for the army of Armenia, the Anatolicon for the army of the East, the Thracian for the army of Thrace, and the Opsikion for the central Praesentalis armies. Lastly, the Carabisianoi district was attributed to the navy. Constans feared that his brother Theodosius might usurp power. Thus, he decided to remove him from the succession line, compelling the man to take religious vows. Theodosius was murdered soon after. With this fratricide act, the emperor became widely unpopular in the capital. After Pope Martin, it was the turn of Maximus the Confessor to assume the consequences of his defiance. Having endured his own trial, he was mutilated and banished to Lazica, where he passed away at 82 years of age. Since the reconquests of Justinian, the western provinces were neglected by successive emperors who focused their efforts in the east. Constans, however, decided to break with this tradition. Gathering the Opsikion troops, he sailed west while his family stayed in the capital. He first stopped at Thessalonica. In this area, he again fought against Slavic tribes with success, and continued inland to operate in southern Greece. The emperor took to the sea again, landing in Italy. From there, he pushed north against the Lombards and the Duchy of Beneventum, capturing a few towns. However, Beneventum itself refused to yield. Learning that King Grimoald was on his way to relieve the city, Constans broke off the siege and withdrew to Roman-controlled Naples. In a subsequent pitched battle, the Roman imperial force was defeated by the Lombard royal army. Constans did not persevere in conquering the Lombards. Instead, he went to Rome, the first emperor to do so since the fall of the Western Roman Empire. There, Despite current religious controversies, this meeting between emperor and pope went well. Vitalian welcomed Constans, who offered gifts to the pontiff. However, it did not hinder Constans from having his men strip precious ornaments from Roman monuments, the Pantheon among them. The monarch eventually arrived at the last destination of his voyage, Sicily. By now, the Arab incursions had resumed. Constans, well aware of this threat, may have considered making the far-removed city of Syracuse the new capital of the empire. His presence in the west, however, was unwelcomed. Indeed, financial strain caused the emperor to levy heavy taxation, creating a great burden on Calabria, Sardinia, Sicily, and Africa. The exarch of Carthage, Gennadius, refused Constance's demand for additional revenue. Fortunately, the emperor's proximity to Africa allowed him to support the rebellion of a certain Eleutherius. This man overthrew the unruly exarch who fled to the Arabs. This caused Africa to endure renewed attacks, but Gennadius would die soon after. Armenia had reverted again to Muslim vassalage, and Muawiyah, now the new caliph, was even more committed against the Romans. This time, the Arabs were assisted by the commander of the Armeniacon district, Saborius. Raids on Aegean islands, coupled with the penetration of Anatolia, put Constantinople in danger yet again. Thankfully for the imperial government, Saborius' rebellion did not last long, as a simple horse-riding accident killed the man. These attacks did not even spare the West, as Sicily fell victim to another raid. This is on this same island that Constans met his end. He was assassinated in Syracuse as he was taking his bath. The motivation behind this murder is unknown. It may have been driven by discontented Roman officials seeing their emperor remain in the west while Muslim forces endangered the empire. Circumstances made Constantine IV the new legitimate monarch. However, the troops elevated the commander of the Opsikion, Mezisius, instead. Unwilling to take power in the first place, he could not even secure the island before troops from Africa and Italy intervened. After their assault, the Muslims had left a garrison in the city of Amorium, making it a forward base for future invasions. Roman troops, however, stormed and reoccupied it, securing Anatolia for now. The year was 669 AD, and Constantine IV was in power since the sudden death of his father in Sicily a year before. After having quelled the usurpation of Mezisius, the troops located there returned to Anatolia. The Arabs took advantage of this fact to pillage the island again. Berber tribes started to convert to Islam, providing useful alliances for the caliphate. Marching west, a Muslim army under Uqba ibn Nafi consolidated control over Fezzan and Tripolitania before thrusting north to the Exarchate itself. There, it established the town of Kairouan as a permanent base for future operations. The Arab strikes towards the capital continued, and in 670 they captured the strategic peninsula of Cyzicus, a military base which was dangerously close to Constantinople. A new steppe tribe was on the rise in the Pontic steppe, the Khazars. Soon, they came into conflict with the Bulgars, who they defeated. Under their leader, Aspero, parts of the Bulgar people fled west. They arrived on the Danube and took control of its delta, coming into conflict with the empire. Around that time, and according to tradition, a man named Callinicus of Heliopolis migrated from Syria to the empire. he brought with him the formula of a new secret weapon he perfected, Greek fire. From now on, the government would equip its navy with the weapon and use it to great effect. To preserve the technological edge, any details about it would be kept a state secret. This invention was much welcome because, while the fighting in Anatolia continued, naval operations intensified. Constantine sent his fleet to raid the coast of Egypt. Despite this, the Arabs attacked along the coast, establishing military bases in the strategic locations of Cilicia, Lycia, Ionia, and the island of Rhodes. After this build-up, the Muslims invaded the Sea of Marmara in force. They launched attacks and clashed with the imperial army and navy in the area. Then, they took shelter in their base of Cyzicus to spend the winter and resume the operations the following years. That a full siege of Constantinople was attempted is uncertain, but the capital was definitely under threat. In 675, it was the turn of the island of Crete to be attacked and occupied. As if the Arab blockade was not enough, the emperor received word that a vassal Slavic chieftain named Perbundus plotted to take Thessalonica for himself. Taking no chances, Constantine had him arrested and later executed. This backfired, as several enraged Slavic tribes now actually besieged Thessalonica. They organized a blockade and ravaged the nearby lands. Soon, a famine afflicted the city. Unfortunately, the intense fighting around Constantinople meant that few resources could be spared. Thessalonica was on its own. Since the Emperor's Constans campaign in Italy, more territories were lost to the Lombards in the south. Later on, some sort of peace agreement was reached. Muawiyah's son, Yazid, crossed Anatolia with reinforcements. Concurrently, raids around the Sea of Marmara intensified. Constantine now decided to make a decisive move and launched a naval counteroffensive. In Greece, battling escalated as well with renewed Slavic assaults on Thessalonica. The defenders stood up courageously, while shipments of food allowed them to continue the resistance. 23 years after the Battle of the Masts, the navies of the Empire and the Caliphate met again off the coast of Lycia. This time, the Romans and their Greek fire shattered the enemy fleet. Pushing the initiative, a force landed in Syria itself, just as Christian rebels called the Mardites descended from their mountains to pillage the region. Meanwhile, the main Roman army chased down the Muslim forces from Anatolia. Once the main threat was lifted, Constantine immediately gathered his forces and rushed west to relieve Thessalonica from both land and sea. The Slavs were crushed and abandoned the siege, leaving the Thessalonians free to reoccupy their lands around the city. With such a resurgence of imperial power, Avar and Slavic embassies arrived to congratulate the emperor. With the military situation stabilized, Constantine made it clear that he wanted to reconcile with the papacy. His great-grandfather, Heraclius, had instigated the doctrine of monothelitism to find common ground with the former imperial subjects of Syria and Egypt. His father, Constans, carried the torch but faced backlash from Africa and Italy. Now, the emperor wrote to the Pope to request a religious council to settle the debate once and for all. Seemingly, Muslim forces had taken advantage of the busy Roman state in Anatolia to attack again in Africa. There, a powerful Berber king named Caecilius might have converted to Islam and submitted to the caliphate for a time. Muawiyah's massive and costly assault on Constantinople had failed, and Constantine had exploited his victory decisively. In the ensuing peace treaty, the caliphate paid a tribute of gold, horses and slaves. while the remaining military bases along the Anatolian coast were evacuated. It was now time to deal with the Bulgars. The emperor and his army marched north along the coast until they encountered the invaders in the Danube Delta. The Bulgars were in a strong defensive position and the Romans could not break their lines. At some point, an illness convinced the emperor to leave the battlefield and to take shelter further south. When the troops learned of the emperor's departure, however, discipline broke down and they retreated as well. The Bulgars took the opportunity to attack, inflicting many casualties during the pursuit. Despite such a defeat, Constantine announced the deposition of his two brothers, Heraclius and Tiberius, who until now were official co-emperors. He did this to secure the succession of his son, Justinian. However, the troops of the Anatolican theme revolted and marched west to enforce their demands. They pushed the emperor to reinstate his two brothers on the basis that 3 emperors should rule to imitate the Holy Trinity. Constantine went for the safe option and conceded to their demands, but took care to have the ringleaders executed. The awaited Sixth Ecumenical Council, the third to take place in Constantinople itself, began on November 7th, 680. Every sees of the Pentarchy were present, but with different degrees of involvement. The emperor himself participated in the debate sessions. Due to the resistance of the Monothelite partisans, the council continued well into the following year. Constantine did not wish for a prolonged conflict against the Bulgars. That is why both sides agreed for a peace settlement. Constantinople recognized the establishment of a Bulgar state beyond the Balkan Mountains. To adapt to this new threat, a theme was created in Thrace. On September 16, 681, the Ecumenical Council closed, with the last of 18 sessions involving more than 150 participants. It condemned monothelitism and declared a posthumous anathema to its main promoters. These included Sergius and Pyrrhus of Constantinople, Cyrus of Alexandria, and Pope Honorius. Having defended heretical doctrine during the council, the current Patriarch of Antioch, Macarius, was deposed. A strict Chalcedonian position was reaffirmed, and communion was restored with Rome. Constantine deposed his two brothers again, this time for good. As a now established Byzantine practice, both got their nose slit to make them unsuited to rule. The succession of the young Justinian was secured. The Muslim governor of Africa, Ugba, launched a great expedition through North African lands, supposedly reaching the Atlantic coast. Enduring disrespect from the Arabs, King Caecilius rebelled. On the way back, he combined his forces with local Roman troops, ambushed and destroyed Ugba's contingent. Caecilius took Kairouan and expelled the Arabs from Africa. Further negotiations between the emperor and the papacy led to some concessions. The archbishopric of Ravenna was placed under the authority of Rome. Not only that, but from now on, papal election would no longer need an approval from the emperor. The successors of Muawiyah faced opposition to their dynastic rule, plunging the caliphate into a second civil war. Caucasian princes started defecting to the empire while Constantine took the offensive. The army reconquered Cilicia, the navy attacked coastal cities in Palestine, and Mardite rebels raided Syria. In a precarious position, Abd al-Malik had to increase the tribute to the empire to 1,000 gold coins, 1 horse and 1 slave every day. Having revived imperial strength, Constantine died of dysentery at about 35 years old. The 16-year-old Justinian thus ascended to the throne, and immediately set out to push Roman ascendancy even further. Appointed by the emperor, General Leontius entered Armenia, established imperial dominion there, and pushed as far as the Caspian Sea. Further negotiations occurred, and a new peace treaty was concluded with the Umayyads. The tribute would continue as usual. The two states would share the revenues of Cyprus, Armenia, and Iberia. Lastly, the troublesome Mardite rebels were to be relocated in Roman lands. They were settled in the Carabisianoi military district to be enlisted in the navy as rowers. The latter district was split in two parts, as the area of mainland Greece was detached to create the theme of Hellas. Justinian gathered a strike force in Thrace and attacked the Slavs located between Constantinople and Thessalonica. The area was secured, many Slavs were resettled in depopulated regions of Anatolia and integrated into the military structure of the empire. During this campaign also occurred clashes with the Bulgars. In Africa, the Arabs got their revenge, defeating and killing Caecilius. They recaptured and garrisoned Kairouan. On the way back, however, the Muslim force of Zawahir was destroyed by imperial troops. When in 688, tribute from the Caliphate did not arrive, the Romans attacked again, capturing Antioch. The treaty was renegotiated. Armenia and Iberia were now fully under the control of the empire, and the remaining Mardite rebels who still pillaged Syria were transferred to Roman lands. Justinian had a firm, hands-on approach to managing the empire. Whether it violated the peace treaty with the Caliphate or not, he organized a population transfer from Cyprus to Cyzicus to strengthen its tax base. These imperial policies, the displacements of Mardite, Slavic, and Cypriot communities, and the relative peace in Anatolia since Constantin IV actually brought results and strengthened the empire. Around that time, Justinian brought his own touch to the coinage by adding representation of Christ to newly minted pieces. This decision displeased the Muslims in the Caliphate, who still used imperial-styled currencies. Justinian had accepted the results of the council held under his father, but he decided to dig further into church matters. He convened his own religious gathering, the so-called Quinisext Council. While the validity of the previous ecumenical canons was confirmed, and heretical sects were condemned, this meeting delved mostly into clerical discipline. The religious practices of the East and the West had differed over time, and this council aimed at a proper settlement. The attendants were mostly Eastern bishops, making the 102 edicted canons a direct attack on the Western clergy. Canon 36 in particular downplayed the authority of Rome to make it equal to Constantinople. Pope Sergius denied the council's validity. In turn, the emperor ordered Sergius to be arrested, but the troops in Italy refused. A new round of political conflict with the papacy had begun. Be it tensions from coinage reforms, treaty violations, the need to attack before the caliphate regained its full strength, or even a direct Arab aggression, war resumed between the two powers. A decisive contest took place at Sebastopolis. The battle was indecisive until a large Slavic contingent defected from the imperial army. The now clearly outnumbered Romans retreated, leaving victory to the Umayyads. An unreliable account writes that a furious Justinian massacred Slavic settlers in Bithynia. The consequence of the defeat was the loss of the ever-contested Armenia. These wars, but also building projects such as an extension of the imperial palace, were expensive, and indeed taxation under Justinian II was oppressive. Because of that, the emperor and his Sacellarius, Stephen the Persian, acquired a reputation of extortion and violence. A conspiracy formed under the leadership of Leontius, the disgraced strategos of the Battle of Sebastopolis, who now commanded the theme of Hellas. Support against the unpopular emperor was easy to find. In 695, the coup unfolded. A rebellion ignited in the capital, and Leontius took power. While his hated officials were burned alive, Justinian avoided death, had his nose slit, and was exiled to Chersonesus. In the year 695 AD, Justinian II, the last emperor of the Heraclian line, was mutilated and exiled to Chersonesus. In his place was crowned a military commander named Leontius. After the latest defeats in the Caucasus, the local authorities in Lazica defected to the Arabs. Indeed, now reunited after its second civil war, the Caliphate resumed its advance. Hassan ibn al-Numan was active in Africa. Without much resistance, he conquered Roman territory and eventually took Carthage itself. Fortunately, the Imperials could count on Berber allies to hinder Arab advances. Having succeeded Caecilius, Queen Dia defeated Hassan at the Battle of Meschiana. At about the same time, a Roman expedition sent by Leontius recaptured Carthage. Now reinforced, the troops of the Caliphate besieged the city again. Outnumbered, the Imperials retreated to the island of Crete. The capital of the Exarchate was lost for good and razed to the ground. Fearing punishment for the failure in Africa, the soldiery mutinied and acclaimed a naval officer, Apsimar, as emperor. The usurper took the name of Tiberius III and sailed to a plague-ridden Constantinople. Benefiting from supporters inside, Tiberius besieged and stormed the capital. As now established Byzantine tradition, the victors mutilated Leontius, then confined him to a monastery. Tiberius repaired Constantinople's sea walls and repatriated Cypriot communities initially moved to Cyzicus by Justinian II to their home island. By now, a new theme had been created, this time for the island of Sicily. The emperor gave his brother Heraclius the exceptional title of monostrategos, giving him command of all armies in Anatolia. The latter led his combined forces across the Taurus Mountains. There, he encountered and defeated enemy forces and raided the area before returning to imperial territory. After this incursion, the Arabs retaliated with a counterattack in Armenia. They established a governor in the province as a way to assert a stronger control over the region. In Italia, Theophylact was appointed the new exarch. At the time in Sicily, he began the trip to Ravenna. In Rome, frictions occurred with the population. Pope John intervened to cool off the tensions, and Theophylact eventually reached the capital of the Exarchate. Armenia was a theater of competing influence between the empire and the Caliphate. During Tiberius's reign, it was the Umayyads who controlled the area. However, the ever-commutative Armenians rebelled, crushed the Arab garrison, and turned to the Romans for assistance. In Africa, another showdown between Dia and Hassan resulted in the defeat and death of the former, striking a decisive blow against Berber resistance. Meanwhile, the exiled Justinian plotted to regain his throne. He escaped Byzantine authorities in Chersonesus and made contact with the Khazar Khagan, from which he obtained shelter and the hand of his sister. To imitate the past emperor Justinian I, the bride took the name of Theodora. Tiberius learned of these events and wrote to the Kagan, bribing him to get rid of the troublemaker. 2 men were sent to kill Justinian, but his devoted wife warned the man in time, and it was him who killed the would-be assassins. Theodora remained in Khazaria while Justinian fled in a boat, faced a storm at sea, but eventually reached Bulgaria. On the Eastern Front, Heraclius continued his campaigns, obtaining further success in Cilicia. However, he could not prevent the Umayyads from subduing the Armenians. The Arabs made an example of the rebellion. They gathered Armenian nobles inside the church and burned them alive. Heraclius was recalled by Tiberius because now an army of Bulgars advanced on Constantinople. The exiled Justinian had struck a deal with the Khan Tervel, promising concessions if he was to regain his throne. At some point, Bulgar soldiers found an abandoned sewer system through which Justinian stormed the city. Tiberius fled the capital but, deserted by his men, was captured. Justinian honored his agreement, giving Tervel the title of Caesar, gifts, territorial concessions, and his daughter's hand in marriage. Leontius, the man who deposed Justinian in the first place, was dragged out of his monastery and, with Tiberius, humiliated and publicly executed. The restored emperor's wife, Theodora, and his newly born son, Tiberius, were recalled from Khazaria to Constantinople. Among Justinian's supporters was a man named Conon, who later took the Romanized name of Leo. Sometime after retaking power, the emperor sent Leo on a diplomatic mission. The aim was to form alliances with Caucasian tribes against the Caliphate. However, it is said that Justinian betrayed his envoy and left him on his own in a perilous journey. Shortly after these events, the Anatolian forces defeated a raid of a Mahdite commander under caliphal allegiance. Now well re-established on his throne, Justinian turned against Bulgaria. He was not satisfied from having conceded territory to Tervel and began a military campaign to retake it. The army marched north and reached the port city of Enkialos. There, Tervel launched a surprise attack, inflicting heavy losses on the imperial army. The Romans retreated inside the city, then withdrew to Constantinople in defeat. The Arabs did not take their latest blow in Cilicia lightly. Their next move was to besiege the city of Tyana. Justinian sent a relief army which was defeated. Tyana fell and was sacked, allowing Arab forces to pillage the region of Cappadocia in the aftermath. During Justinian's first reign, Ravenna had shown itself disobedient. Not only that, but the city sought to take its distance from the religious authority of Rome. The emperor sent an expedition to retaliate, leading to a purge of the officials of the city and the arrest of Archbishop Felix. By this time, the Muslims brought their conquest of North Africa to completion, removing imperial presence on the continent for good. There, a Byzantine official, Julian of Ceuta, pledged allegiance to the conquerors. It is said that, motivated by a personal feud with the Visigothic king Roderick, he incited the Muslims to invade the Iberian Peninsula. After having punished the separatist Archbishop Felix, Justinian invited Pope Constantine to the capital. This was likely part of a strategy by the emperor to obtain a papal recognition of the canons of the Quinisext Council, a gathering organized during his first reign, mostly to standardize Christian practices between East and West. While it is unclear to what extent Constantine accepted this council, an agreement was reached. Thus, relations with the papacy improved. Justinian was not merciful to his enemies and During his harsh second reign, the officials of Chersonesus, supported by the Khazars, rose in rebellion. The emperor sent an expedition, which was defeated. By now, a usurper named Bardanes took the lead of the insurgency, after which a second imperial fleet defected to the rebels. Justinian was away monitoring the situation in Anatolia, allowing Bardanes to take Constantinople swiftly. There, he executed the young Tiberius while his men tracked down Justinian in Anatolia and ended his eventful life. Bardanes took the regnal name of Philippicus. He reignited hostilities with the papacy when he declared his adherence to monothelitism, a doctrine established by former emperor Heraclius, which had been ultimately rejected by both Rome and Constantinople. Thus, Pope Constantine refused to recognize the new emperor. Turval used the death of Justinian as a pretext to invade. The Bulgar attacks even reached the outskirts of Constantinople. The Romans managed to fend off these assaults with the transfer of the Opsikion troops to Thrace. The empire's border defenses were collapsing. Recent events allowed the Arabs to take advantage and intensify the raids. They penetrated deep into Anatolia, ravaging vast areas in its interior. Most damaging of all was the destruction of Antioch in Pisidia. Not even 2 years after his accession to the throne, Philippicus was, with the involvement of dissatisfied Opsikion troops, usurped, blinded, and exiled in favor of yet another pretender named Anastasius II. Seeing what rebellious thematic armies were capable of, the new emperor appointed trusted men in positions of power. Among these men was Leo, the envoy sent by Justinian II to the Caucasus Mountains. He had spent several years among the islands and eventually safely made it back to imperial territory. He was named Strategos of the Anatolikon, while a certain Artabasdos took charge of the Armeniakon. Anastasius moved against the monothelite policies of his predecessor. In Constantinople, a new Diothelite patriarch was elected, and in Italy, Exarch Scholasticus restored relations between the empire and the papacy. Arab attacks continued and intensified, and the region of Galatia was devastated. Anastasius sent a delegation to negotiate but also spy on the caliphate. During this mission, it was discovered that the caliphate was, in fact, building up its forces to attack Constantinople itself. Learning about this, Anastasius prepared for the incoming siege, repaired the city walls, and commanded anyone who could not stockpile enough food for 3 years to evacuate the city. As the Arabs built new ships for the offensive, the court ordered a counterattacking force to gather in Rhodes. However, the troops rebelled. In Adramyttium, they elevated a reluctant official as Theodosius III. Once again, the Opsikion army backed the usurpation. The rebels eventually stormed the capital while Anastasius took refuge in Nicaea, seeking support from his eastern governors to no avail. Eventually, Anastasius surrendered and was exiled to Thessalonica. Theodosius took power. Since Anatolia was now a battleground between Roman and Arab forces, Theodosius sought to secure the western flank and concluded a deal with the Bulgars. For their part, as former supporters of Anastasius II, neither Leo nor Artabasdos supported Theodosius. Instead, they allied against the new emperor. The Arabs continued their push into Anatolia and eventually besieged Amorium, the capital of the Anatolikon theme. With his city threatened, Leo engaged in negotiations. Exploiting division among the Byzantines, the Arab commander Maslama ibn Abd al-Malik would support Leo in his bid to take power, and once emperor, Leo would submit to the caliphate. This led to an agreement. The strategos, however, escaped and fled for time, which allowed his Anatolian territory to be left relatively unscathed. In Nicomedia, Leo captured the emperor's son, leading Theodosius to abdicate. Leo III was crowned in Constantinople. For his support, Leo rewarded Artabasdos with the title of Curopalates and his daughter's Anna's hand in marriage. The new emperor now did everything in his power to prepare the capital for the immense challenge ahead. In July 717, a massive Arab army crossed the Hellespont and forced its way to the land walls of Constantinople. Later, the associated fleet arrived in the Sea of Marmara. The city of Constantine was fully blockaded by land and sea. The forces of the Caliphate reportedly counted up to 120,000 men and 1,800 ships. A veritable life-or-death scenario for the empire. Fortunately, the Romans possessed several assets they could call upon. On land, the massive Theodosian walls were too formidable for the Arabs to storm the city. At sea, the secret weapon of Greek fire sank many ships and prevented the enemy from attacking the walls. Leo reportedly struck a blow at the besiegers when he managed, through deceit, to have their food supplies burned. He could also count on the Bulgars, who repeatedly attacked the Arabs and inflicted rising casualties. It occurred that false news of the fall of the capital reached Sicily. Its strategos, Sergius, elevated an official as emperor, taking the name of Tiberius. Leo's reaction allowed for a swift defeat of the rebels. The usurper was executed, and the traitor Sergius fled to the Lombards, then returned upon receiving amnesty. The Muslim army suffered badly from a harsh winter, which was, on top of that, aggravated by disease and a severe shortage of food. Arab reinforcements were ambushed by Roman forces in Anatolia, while Christian sailors in the Muslim fleet defected to the empire. With casualties piling up and no progress in sight, the new Caliph Umar decided to abandon the siege. Further calamities occurred during the retreat, as natural disasters destroyed many more ships. This whole operation was reported to have inflicted catastrophic losses on the Umayyads. The Romans stood triumphant, and Constantinople's legendary status magnified. The 22 years following the deposition of Justinian II were marked by constant infighting among the elites of Byzantium. All the while, the Caliphate exploited the chaos. Africa was lost, and Anatolia suffered massive attacks which built up into the great Arab siege of Constantinople. Among the most perilous chapters of the history of the Roman Empire, this siege was to be the climax of the Byzantine-Arab wars, as after the devastating defeat, never again would the Caliphate attempt an assault of this scale. With his legitimacy secured by such a great victory, Emperor Leo kick-started a new era of stability under the Isaurian dynasty.